Hello, everybody, and welcome to my channel called the Esoteric Page and Film Master. Today, we're going to be going over a book by Kerth. I read this book probably about 9 months ago, and I am going over it again for y'all. This book is really mind blowing. It is called Cannibalism, Blood Drinking, and High Adept Satanism by Kerth. Now, I do have to warn you that there is a lot of stuff that goes on with children in this book, a lot of ritual killing. So I just do want to warn you that if you're a person that has a queasy stomach or doesn't like hearing graphic details, then just be aware that I have warned you, because we're going to be going deep on this book. This book is very revealing. And on top of that, through all my research that I've been doing over the past 3 years, this guy lines up with a lot of stuff that high level occultists, people in the military, like, they put this stuff in their papers. So I have no reason to believe that this person is lying. I believe this person, I don't know if Kerth is still alive. I thought I had researched him after I got done reading, and he has since passed. But he is basically a survivor of satanic ritual abuse, and he wrote this book, revealing everything that he went through and stuff that he saw that high elitist Satanists do in these circles. So we're going to go ahead and start on. I'm going to start on the introduction by the author and just read a little bit out of there. The author goes on to say, I am a Christian, yet I think that both Satanists and Christians will find this book to be of interest, as will those who believe in other philosophies. Only the faint-hearted should avoid reading on. And I agree with that. After rereading this, it's really makes you have emotions that aren't very good. This book's only purpose is to shine a light in the darkness. I am simply going to share information and tell you stories. I'm unconcerned whether you believe these stories to be fiction or nonfiction. These stories reveal truths, and you can decide for yourself whether you believe these truths to be satirical metaphors or literal descriptions of real-world events. Nevertheless, it has been said that truth is stranger than fiction, and I assure you that these are perhaps the strangest stories you will ever be told. It isn't my job to convince you of the literal truth of these stories. It's only my job to testify honestly according to my recall and understanding. Growing up, most of my family were Christians. Of my immediate family, none of these were Satanists or even aware of Satanism. But there was an older relative, a kind of family patriarch, who openly practiced Christianity but privately practiced Satanism. Also, there were some other more distant older relatives who were Satanists. Satanic secret societies are very secretive and careful about who they recruit, and for various reasons they wanted me. However, ultimately I came to reject Satanism and I escaped from it. So that's just a little backstory from the author. On the next page, on page 2, he goes on to say that not all Satanists practice cannibalism or blood drinking, and not all Satanists practice deviant sex. In fact, I would say that a majority of Satanists reject high practices. Those Satanists who I would describe as high adept Satanists are the most powerful of all Satanists. Some high adept practitioners may dabble in cannibalism or deviant sex because it amuses them. but they never used such practices as a part of their religious rituals. The high adept Satanists are primarily concerned with psychic powers. He then goes on to say that sex magic is the practice of intense sexual experience to evoke the life force for occult purposes. Some Satanists add the letter K to the word magic to indicate that they aren't referring to stage magic, but sex magic as a lesser discipline of satanic occultism. Some Satanists are obsessed with sex magic, while others find it zealous. And I will probably be reading, I'm probably going to cover the first 80 pages of this book because it's a lot. And I know once I get going, it's going to get really, really interesting, and you will want to hear this. So not all Satanists are the same, but most Satanists do have certain things in common. First, there is the rejection of Christianity. Secondly, all Satanists are very secretive. Even those who publicly profess their religion typically keep certain other facts about their practices from the public. And third, perhaps most importantly, most Satanists see their practices as a path to worldly power. On page number 3, he goes on to say that there is differences between Satanism and Luciferism. Lucifer, the name, is associated with the planet Venus and the ancient goddess Ishtar, which this is her right here. She also has, if you ever look, she has, like I was talking about the Egyptian hieroglyphics the other day, and she is half human, half animal. Here are her feet. She's between 2 owls also and 2 sphinx. And that right there, that's a lot of symbolism with the owls. If you know about Bohemian Grove, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I will, if you don't know about Bohemian Grove, don't worry. I will cover that in a future episode about the owl. I also wanted to point out that she is also associated with Easter. Ishtar, Easter. Another thing about her is that she is associated with the 8-pointed star. So here you go, right here. Here's Wonder Woman. She has the 8-pointed star. She is basically representing Ishtar of Babylon. So the Babylon symbolism there. And you also got Jake Gyllenhaal with his 8-pointed tattoo in this movie. And of course, if you don't know about this guy, his name is Klaus Schwab. He has a book called CV19, The Great Reset. And he has the 8-pointed star right there. And another one that has the 8-pointed symbolism and all their things is Red Hot Chili Peppers and their logo. And I just wanted to mention this picture real quick because this is when they played in Egypt a couple of years ago. And the whole thing is just pyramids. Their whole set is pyramids. So they, I believe they're very, very conscious in their stuff. And here it is. It tells you they're playing at the pyramids. And I'm trying to find, oh, here it is. Here's their 8-pointed star. So for all of y'all, whenever y'all see 8-pointed stars in movies or TV shows, just know that it goes back to Ishtar, to her. The name Lucifer can be associated with the planet Venus. The name Satan can be associated with the planet Saturn and the ancient god Baal. Remember I mentioned Baal, Baal. This is him. Yeah, there he is. So there he is, the Egyptian god. This was the idol that they were worshiping. Another thing I wanted to say too about cannibalism in the Bible is you take the names Cain and Abel, um, put them together, and you have cannibal. So I just wanted to point that out. Um, Luciferism takes many different forms. Some Satanists are simply atheists who wish to give their rejection of Christianity a ritualistic structure. Some Satanists are really pagans who desire to return to the ways of pre-Christian nature worship. Some Luciferians identify their beliefs with the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, which taught mysticism and hidden knowledge. Some Luciferians are high degree Freemasons who conceal their true philosophy from lower ranked Masons and the public in general. Although most Gnostics do not believe in Lucifer, some Luciferians believe in a twisted form of Gnosticism which rejects the material world and its creator as evil. They see Lucifer as the bringer of pure intellectual enlightenment. The next thing for Luciferisms is many Luciferians are really politically oriented, such as those in the Fabian Society, who wish to create a global socialist civilizations. In his book, New World Order, H.G. Wells gives an idealistic description of what such a global government would be like. And that is one book that I do plan to cover in an upcoming episode is The New World Order by H.G. Wells. Some Satanists are scientific rationalists who see Satanism as a mechanism to reject the superstition of traditional religions. Although they may not openly identify themselves as Satanists, the skeptics movement and transhumanism have their roots in Satanism. The aesthetic rhetoric of the skeptics movement sounds similar to the doctrine of atheistic Satanism, and this is not a coincidence. The transhumanists wish to use computers, robotics, and genetic engineering to create a new species that will displace humanity. Julian Huxley, who is another person that I am going to cover. I'm going to do a bunch of global books because these are people that are in the know that are changing our world right now. These people wrote books 100 years ago, and all this stuff is coming into fruition now. He first founded the transhumanist movement and was a member of a Luciferian secret society. Some Luciferians are dedicated to the occult, such as the Believers in Theosophy and the Order of the Golden Dawn. The word occult refers to hidden knowledge, and it involves secretive practices for using psychic powers in ways that are unethical. Some Luciferians wish to unify the world by creating a new globalist religion, which merges all religions into one. This seems to be the goal of Lucis Trust, which was originally called Lucifer Publications and is now associated with the United Nations. And I am going to go over here because Lucis Trust is very interesting. This is their website right here. This is their logo, and look at that. They're made out of Alice Bailey. And if anybody knows Alice Bailey or what's her name? I forgot her name, but her and another one, Hitler really, really looked up to and took their religion to heart. Another thing that I want to say about Lucis Trust is the former president before T-Rump, he got Lucius Trust to do their logo. So this name right here totally went with Lucius Trust, Lucifer's Publications, to make his logo whenever he was running. So there you got the occult and government connection right there. So yeah, there you go. Yeah, there. It's very interesting whenever history is not boring when you start putting all the occultic pieces together. Because this is one thing that they remember, everything in school that they've taught us, they've not told the truth in any of it. Very, very little, very limited hangout in the stuff that they taught us at school. So they make it seem like history is very boring for purpose, but it is not. And just about everything that I've been doing, you can bet that there is occultic relationships there along with Hollywood relationships. And it's very, very interesting. Some Satanists seek to understand magical workings by which they can develop psychic powers to manipulate other people and events. The students of Aleister Crowley follow this path. And there's another book that I will cover that has a whole lot of stuff about Aleister Crowley. Okay. On page number 5, he says the most dangerous of these criminal enforcers are Satanists who practice cannibalism and blood drinking. Globalist plutocratic Satanism is behind virtually every major problem in this troubled world. You stand a better chance of surviving these difficult times if you understand the true nature of Satanism. This is true no matter what your belief system is. The leaders of Luciferian secret societies tend to deceive even their own followers. So even practicing Luciferians need insight into the nature of how their religion actually works. Blood drinking, cannibalism, and PEDO sex are only common among the minority of Satanists who run the secret criminal operations. I'm going into page 6 now. And he goes on to say, as a child, I was subjected to SRA, which is satanic ritual abuse. As I said before, although the members of my immediate family were not Satanists and knew nothing of Satanism, an older family patriarch was a well-connected Satanist, former Nazi who my family called Shotzi was a nanny and babysitter to me. She had been introduced to my nuclear family by this family patriarch, Nazi war criminal. She had been brought over to the USA by the CIA under the umbrella of Operation Paper, CLIP. So she was given a new identity and DNAZIFIED. She was trained in a form of MK Ultra mind control by the CIA. She attempted to use MK Ultra methods on me, but was unsuccessful. So another Satanist who was an associate of my family patriarch used other methods. His name was Bob, and he used a combination of techniques, including hypnotism. I was trained and conditioned to have two personalities. When I was with my Christian family, I was called by the name of Kerth. When I was involved with Luciferian secret societies, I was known by the name of Kathy. These were really two different lifestyles and two different cultures. I had two different personalities, each of which fit into these two different cultures. But the Christian culture knew nothing of the Luciferian culture, while the Luciferians knew everything about the Christians. The name we used for this secret culture Satanism was the Society of Lucifer. So although I wasn't an initiated member of any specific secret society, I was a participant in the general society of Lucifer. Both the patriarch and Bob worked for a man nicknamed the Baron. He was the head of a secret criminal syndicate, among other things. The Baron ran a PEDO sex ring. He used child prostitutes to secretly film powerful men performing acts of PEDO. These films were then used for blackmail purposes. In my identity as Kathy, I was trained and used as a child prostitute. I was forced to star in child prawn films. The Baron worked for an organization known as the Committee, which was located somewhere in Europe. And if you are familiar with the committee, there is an elite committee called the Committee of 300. I have a book on that also that I will be going over in future episodes. Okay, so now we're going to go on the very first chapter. This one is called Cannibalism and the Mystery of the Sphinx, and this is about two crazy sisters. Oh my God. These sisters are wild. I'm telling y'all right now that they are two evil sisters. Okay. It was two female Satanists who were called the Two Sisters who first spoke to me of the mystery of the Sphinx. They believed that understanding the Sphinx was essential to attaining worldly power, and they related this to cannibalism. If I'm going to talk about cannibalism in the Illuminati, I suppose I have to start with these two sisters. The reason I met the two sisters had to do indirectly with my work as a child prostitute. When I was a child, I was forced into child prostitution by Satanists. I feel that I never really had a choice in any of this. Among other things, there were prawn films and photos made of me. These were made with high production values. They were popular with wealthy Satanists. And the two sisters were wealthy Satanists who were fans of pornographic materials. They collected and traded child prawn with other wealthy Satanists in the same way that ordinary people might collect and trade baseball cards and such. It was their hobby. They were very wealthy and had a large collection. I met with them one afternoon when I was 12 years old. They weren't interested in molesting me, which was good because I hate it when I was forced to sexually service adults. They just wanted to meet me and to have me sign some of the photographs in their collection. I was told that they were fans of my child porno modeling, but really there were other agendas going on. The head of the satanic coven that claimed ownership of me was a wealthy Satanist nicknamed the Baron. He wasn't royalty, but he was proud of his reputation as a robber baron. Everyone in the Society of Lucifer called him the Baron, and everyone called me Kathy, although I was a boy. And when the Baron wanted to have access to me, he could arrange it in various ways. When he wanted to have access to Kathy, Kerth would be put to sleep with hypnotism and other methods. Then Kathy would be awakened. But really, I was always the same person. Okay, page 10. I just had two different modes. During this visit, I was in Kathy's mode. So the Baron arranged to have access to me for a few days, and he took me off on a trip. I had mixed feelings about the Baron. He was very dangerous to anyone who might betray him or oppose him. So with good reason, I feared him. However, if he was in a good mood, he tended to treat me kindly. As long as I did what as I was told, he didn't hurt me or go out of his way to humiliate me. The Baron was a tall, handsome man with a commanding voice. He had graying hair, and honestly, sometimes he was fun to be with. He rarely wanted me for sex, actually, and he could be funny and charming. Up front, he made some things clear about this trip. I wouldn't be expected to do sex work, and there wouldn't be any satanic blood rituals that I would be forced to attend. I was glad to hear this because I didn't like those things. The Baron explained that we were just going to meet two peculiar women. It was a simple social visit, but even at the age of 12, I knew nothing was simple when it involved the Baron. We rode to our destination in a comfortable limo owned by the Baron. The limo was driven by a man who acted as the Baron's butler, driver, and bodyguard. In the front seat with him was a woman who worked for the Baron as a maid, sex worker, and assassin. Like the Baron, they were initiated members of a satanic secret society, and they had sworn their loyalty to the Baron and the Church of Satan. I wasn't an initiated Satanist, I was just property owned by the Baron. If I didn't obey the Baron and do as he told me, I knew that he would kill my mother and torture me to death. I also knew there was no point in going to the authorities. I had been forced to sexually service a police commissioner under the control of the Baron. I had been told that such authorities, whom I might go to for help, had already been bribed and blackmailed. The Baron had intended that when I became older, I would become an initiated Satanist. But until then, certain information, such as the location of the homes of the aristocratic Satanists, was forbidden to me. So I had to wear blacked out sunglasses as a type of blindfold during part of the trip. This way, I wouldn't know the location of the home of the two sisters. Also, it was expected that I would dress and act like a little girl during the whole trip. By that time, I was 12 years old. I was accustomed to these things. Going on to number 11, page 11. One thing about Satanists is that they like to turn things around. Whatever Christian society does, they do the opposite. The satanic trainers want to de-pattern the mindset of mainstream society. They believe that good is evil and evil is good. Therefore, from their point of view, it's good to train little boys to dress like little girls. Thus, all the stuff that we see going on, they're really coming after the kids now. Like I said, this is one reason why I'm doing this. Like most little boys, I hated the idea of being forced to dress like a girl. But the Baron was having none of that. Whenever I was around the Baron, he insisted that I dress like a girl. His intention was to de-pattern my Christian socialization, but also he felt sexually aroused by little boys who dressed in little girls' clothing. The Baron dabbled in PEDO, sex sometimes, but typically he preferred adults and he was bisexual. He had a voracious appetite for certain things, like sex, wealth, power, and rare books, knowledge, gourmet, food, alcohol, and revenge against those who dared to betray him. He loved being a Satanist. When I was dressed up as a little girl, I didn't really look pretty. I looked like a homely, boyish girl. I'm not sure why satanic PEDOs were turned on by this. But then again, I can't pretend to understand how PEDOs think. The first day of the trip, we drove into a hotel in a city somewhere. I don't know how long it took us to get there. The driver and maid were in the front seats, but the driver didn't wear his usual butler uniform, and the maid didn't wear her usual maid's outfit. I slept most of the time. The Baron dictated business letters to his maid, who took notes in shorthand. When I was awake, the Baron lectured me on the stupidity of Christian morality and the brilliance of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. but I paid little attention. I felt bored. I was glad when we reached the hotel. Before we went in, the maid straightened up my dress and touched up my makeup. She warned me to not attract attention to myself. She told me to act girlish and not like a stupid little boy. The hotel was very upscale. As we walked through the hallways, nobody paid any attention to me. The room we stayed in was large. The Baron slept in the king-size bed with both his male servant and his female servant. They drank whiskey and had sex together in different ways. I quickly got bored watching them and turned on the television set instead. I sat on the floor close to the TV, flipping through the channels. I found a cowboy movie about two men trying to rescue a girl kidnapped by Indians. Sitting there in a girl's dress and wig, I didn't identify with the cowboys. I identified with the kidnapped girl. I wished someone would rescue me, but I doubted that anyone would or could. Eventually, I became tired. I took off my dress and wig, washed my face, and slept on the couch as the Baron and his servants wrestled together in sexual delight. The next morning, I was awakened before dawn. The three adults were already bathed and dressed. The maid was unpacking some special clothing for me. The Baron had wanted me to look especially cute that day. The Baron sat on the edge of the tub as I bathed and talked to me of the importance of my appearance. After I dried off, he watched with interest as his maid dressed me. She had me put on a jockstrap that was too tight and which hurt to wear. She made me wear a trainer bra, which felt very weird. Then she had me put on a petticoat. Over that, she had me put on a floral dress that was very colorful. She zipped me up, and the dress fit perfectly. It had white lace around the neck, and it went down over my knees. I put on white socks with ruffled tops. I put on shiny black patent leather slippers with the pink ribbons. I put on a pink horned rimmed glasses with little diamonds in the sides. The maid produced a blonde haired wig with bangs and curls. She fitted it onto my head like a helmet. She knelt before me and carefully painted my fingernails red. And then she sat in the chair and had me stand up close to her. She carefully painted my face with makeup. She then completed my outfit with pink vinyl purse that had a long strap. She put some of my makeup into the purse and hung it over the shoulder. Then she and the Baron walked around me like two wolves circling a lost lamb. Nodding his approval at my appearance, the Baron walked me over to the full-length mirror. Holding his hands on my shoulders, he looked at my reflection. I immediately felt dejected. I thought I looked ridiculous. I looked like a human-sized doll. I felt as if I had been dressed up in a clown's outfit against my will. I could feel the humiliation as if it wore an energetic force throughout my entire body. I slumped my shoulders and frowned. However, my reaction to seeing myself in the mirror brought about an immediate response from the Baron. He had a cane that he often carried, and he smacked me with it hard across my butt. In a voice filled with emotion, he said, "Now, I'll have none of that grumpy Gus behavior on this day of all days. None of that indeed. No slumping your shoulders, and frowning like a stupid little boy. You may act like that when you're with your idiot Christian family, but this afternoon you're meeting with important members of the Society of Lucifer. And remember that we are your real family. You've been trained better than this, so let's see you smile and shine like the darling little girly boy you really are." The harsh pain in my buttocks woke me up instantly. I could feel my heart beat harder. I felt my feminine persona wash over me. Instantly, I felt wiser and more confident. I pulled my shoulders back. The feeling of the trainer bra helped me to correct my posture. I robotically smiled in a girlish way. I held my head up high and put my hands on my hips. I took another look in the mirror at my dress and realized that it was made of beautiful material. In a soft, feminine voice, I said, "I love this dress on me. The Baron laughed and clapped his hands. With gladness in his voice, he said, "Now there's my Kathy, and don't you look just ravishing, my dear girly boy? You look good enough to eat." Um, so this is just like we're going to the sisters. So this is just like before they go up there to meet them. I'm telling y'all, this story is oh my God, it's so evil. The maid who dressed me giggled out of the side of her mouth. She said to the Baron, "Don't say anything like that around the two sisters. You know how they are. They might take you literally." The Baron laughed at that. He kissed me delicately on my cheek. As I looked at myself in the mirror, appreciating my appearance from a new point of view, I could see the Baron standing behind me with a big wolfish grin on his face. I'm going to page 14. When I first looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw a strange little girly boy, and that made me feel ashamed. But after the Baron hit me and threatened me, I felt my perception of reality change. It's difficult to explain how all this made me feel. The best way that I can explain it is that it made me feel that I wasn't there and that somebody else was. The whole female impersonation thing tended to suppress the persona of my everyday self and bring forth a persona from some long past incarnation. I believe that I had been a woman in a previous lifetime, and that when I was forced to dress in girls' clothing, some of my personality from that previous incarnation was called forth. For some reason, the Baron didn't want me to use the restroom at the gas station. Perhaps this was because he thought I might see something in the gas station that would tell me where we were. Satanists are obsessed with secrecy. For them, secrecy is a religious duty they take very seriously. So when I needed to urinate, he had his driver pull over onto a country road. When I got out, he got out with me and watched me as I peed. He warned me to be careful and not get my dress wet or dirty. I gratefully pulled off the overly jock strap and let it fall to my ankles. I carefully lifted up the dress and petticoat with one hand and used my other hand to hold my penis as I peed. As I peed, the Baron chuckled and said, "I wished I had a camera with me. That'd make a wonderful photo." As we approached within a few miles of the home of the two sisters, which was located in the remote area, the Baron prepared for me the visit. He told me to be sweet and polite and to look to him for his lead. He fed me a half sandwich and some tea. He promised that if I was good, I'd get the other half of the sandwich after the visit. He warned me that when we reached their house, I must not eat or drink anything. No matter what they offered, I must refuse. Then he told me the story of the two sisters. They were born to a brother and sister who had married. When they were growing up, this brother and sister had destined to marry, but of course this was illegal in Christian society. So a false identity was created for the sister, and the siblings married anyway. They were very wealthy heirs, and so they had little trouble arranging this. After all, the wealthy should have anything they want, so said the Baron. At first, the brother and sister were happy as husband and wife. They had two daughters born a few years apart. The two sisters looked normal and seemed healthy. The parents of the two sisters were generational Satanists and were members of a Luciferian secret society. They had been married in a traditional Christian church ceremony, and they had also been joined in a secret satanic hand fasting ritual. But their romance would only last for a few years. Into every garden of paradise comes a snake with the temptation of forbidden fruit. This incestuous married couple discovered a book written by a fellow Satanist. This author had been a student of Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud is somebody that I'll go into later. He's also very important, kind of like Charles Darwin is. This author had been a student of Sigmund Freud, and he had a degree in psychiatry. This satanic Freudian psychiatrist had postulated that in the future, everyone in the world would be promiscuous, homosexual PEDOs. This is where all the LGBTQ BS comes in. I'm telling y'all, there's a lot of people, like, I know I have friends that like this organization, but they really are not an organization for y'all. They are a weapon. They are a weapon against the family hierarchy. And I will get into a deep episode about all that in the future. He based this theory on some type of Freudian logic. It's not that Freud himself was a believer in this theory, but this satanic psychiatrist had taken Freud's idea and twisted them in that direction. This satanic psychiatrist projected that in the future everyone would be sexually promiscuous because sexual repression was the basis for all neuroses. Therefore, the government will demand sexual promiscuity from all its citizens in order to cure society of neurosis. Furthermore, the satanic author made the assumption that in the future everyone will be required by law to be homosexual. And this is the problem that I have with this movement, because they are big time weaponizing them right now, and the war drums are marching forward on this deal, especially with the sexualization of children. Like I said before, like, I don't care if people are gay when they're like adults, do whatever. I don't care. It's the children in particular that this is a problem for me. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that they are confusing children of their gender. They're indoctrinating the children with all this stuff. It's just horrible. I believe in let kids be kids. Like, my goodness, like, let children be children. As innocent as possible. We need to leave them alone. This would be a method of preventing overpopulation, and that is exactly what it is. It's so people do not produce children. He predicted that in order to accept this unnatural sexual orientation, people would need to be continually socialized from birth and throughout their childhood. So the PEDO's education of children would then become the norm. Therefore, for these reasons of satanic logic, he predicted that in the future, everyone in the world will be promiscuous, homosexual PEDOs, which is no, hell no. No. The mother and father of the two sisters became fascinated with the ideas in this book of satanic psychiatry. They met with the aging psychiatrist, and he convinced them of the intellectual superiority of his predictions. So they began to experiment with homosexuality. The father began to have sex with gay men, and the mother experimented with lesbianism. They both became converts to gay lifestyles, but for some reason, this made them angry with each other. They argued bitterly and decided to divorce. They divided their vast estate, and each parent got one of the daughters. The mother got the younger one, and the father got the older one. The two sisters were very young at this time and not likely to clearly remember their early childhood. So their parents decided to never tell either sister of the other's existence. Years went by, and the parents didn't communicate with each other at all. They both pursued gay lifestyles and experimented with PEDO sex. The two sisters, although raised separately, were routinely sexually molested throughout their childhood by female prostitutes hired by their parents. This is the group mind of the elite. They are sick like this. Their parents considered this to be a vital part of the girl's education and social conditioning. Although divorced, they both continued to believe in the twisted teachings of that satanic psychiatrist. Therefore, the two sisters were both encouraged in the direction of lesbianism and PEDO. At this point, I will give the two sisters names. I'm not going to tell you their real names. Some privacy is allowed even to Satanists. I'm going to name them Nancy and Bernice. The younger I'll call Nancy, and the older Bernice, whom everyone would come to call Bernie. So Nancy was raised by the mother, and Bernie was raised by the father. So it was that they grew up and became young women. They both went to school in New York City without knowing of the other's existence. They socialized with other young, wealthy lesbians. One day, purely by chance, they met at a party. The attraction was immediate. They began dating and became lovers. They each wrote home to their parents telling of their new love. Each sister sent a photograph of her new lover with the letter. When the parents received these letters, they each suspected the truth. So they finally had a long overdue phone conversation. This was the first time they had spoken with each other since their divorce nearly 2 decades ago. As they talked, it soon became apparent to the parents that the two sisters, although separated since childhood, had accidentally met one another in New York City. They had fallen in love without knowing that they were actually sisters. The unsuspecting two sisters were invited to visit Nancy's mother's at her home in another city. Their father showed up there also. Their parents explained the truth that they were sisters. And the two sisters were delighted. They had been raised to believe that the sexual values of mainstream society were false. They had been raised to believe that PEDO, incest, and homosexual promiscuity were good. Their parents had raised them to have these values. But their parents, for some strange reason, didn't seem happy about how their daughters had grown up. As with so many dreams, once fulfilled, they often failed to live up to the expectations. Too late. The parents finally became disillusioned with the insane teachings of the satanic psychiatrist. However, the parents realized that the Society of Lucifer was the only social network that would accept lesbian incestuous relationships, and thus the parents arranged for their daughters to become initiated into a Luciferian secret society. For some reason, the news that his daughters had taken this path distressed their father, and even though he had put them on it, he soon committed suicide, blaming himself. The mother, an unhealthy cocaine addict, also died afterwards. The two sisters became the heirs to a vast fortune, and they were recruited by the Illuminati. They performed all the rituals and took all the oaths. All of their closest friends were wealthy Satanists. And it was in this international society of Lucifer that they found acceptance. And the two sisters also traveled the world together, lived together, and grew to middle age together. That is how the Baron and I found them, a middle-aged couple living together in a remote location. As we approached the mansion, I could see that it seemed like a normal-looking large home. The Baron had his driver park his limo out in the front. The driver and maid waited in the front seat while the Baron and I got out. 3 women dressed in men's clothing came out to greet us. One of them was dressed in rough, worky clothing, and she carried a shotgun. The other 2 had business suits, and the bulge of their shoulder holsters could be seen. They looked in my purse but didn't search me. However, they did politely frisk the Baron. We were escorted up to the front door and led inside by them. There we found the 2 sisters standing in the lobby of their home. They looked nearly identical, except that they were dressed differently. One looked traditionally feminine in a dress with long hair. The other looked feminine as well, and her clothing and her short hair gave her a slight manly appearance. She wore what looked like a man's suit, except that it had lace and decorative stitchery, and the tie that she wore turned out to be made of black pearls. The first thing I noticed once we entered the lobby was the smell. The house smelled faintly of cigarettes and incense, and there was a stuffy feel to the air. I had to continually repress the temptation to cough. The sisters wore heavy perfume. Nancy's perfume was floral, and Bernie's perfume smelled like men's aftershave. I felt an immediate feeling of fear once we entered the house. I could feel a slight discomfort in my solar plexus, and this pain grew more intense the longer we were there. The sisters seemed happy to meet with the Baron and me. When the two of them spoke, they were like one person. Sometimes they spoke at exactly the same time, saying exactly the same thing, and they often completed each other's sentences. They smiled almost continually, and they spoke with cheerful emotion in their voices. They were clearly intelligent and articulate. They were both very complimentary to me. They told me that they were fans of my modeling and that they were very pleased to meet with me in person. They both went on about how lovely I looked and how pretty I was dressed. At first, I felt embarrassed and humiliated by their comments, but I went on smiling and thanked them politely. Then my viewpoint shifted and I felt pride in my feminine persona. I straightened my back and smiled as brightly as I could. They showed us the living room where there were photos on the wall. They showed us photos of their parents and grandparents. I noticed that everyone in their family, both male and female, had nearly the same face. They all had small chins and turned up little noses, all of which gave them a slightly piggish appearance. And on that note, I do want to make one mention. I know I said that there's only two sexes, boy and girl. There is a third sex, and it's hermaphrodites. And it is the sex where a person is born with both sexes. On that particular bloodline of people that are born like that, I will do a future episode. Because those people that are born with that, I believe they are coming from the line of the fallen angels. And I'll get more into that on the future episode and we'll go through all of that stuff. There is a lot of people in Hollywood that have both of these sexes, and I'll give you my deep thoughts on that on the future episode. They explained that their family was very concerned with their aristocratic bloodlines. They explained that for many generations, they only intermarried with each other's certain aristocratic families. In this way, they maintained their breeding. They said that all of this was with a rather snobbish tone of voice, which suggested that they believed themselves to be our superiors, but the Baron seemed aloof to such implied insults. I noticed that the Baron kept on slyly glancing about the house as we walked through it. When we strolled by some windows and looked out into the backyard, I noticed a strange sight. It looked as if the backyard was caged in. There was a wire mesh that covered all the sides of it, and there was a wire mesh on top. Inside the caged area, there were swings, a picnic table, and some other things that you might expect children to use. Bernie explained that's the play area for our slave girls. We can't expect them to work all the time. Nancy went on, but they're too precious to us, so we can't let them escape. We have to protect them from the outside world. I realized that this home was like a prison or a bank. It was all locked down, and that meant that the Baron and I were locked in as well. The two sisters said that they were about to eat lunch and invited us to join them. The Baron said that we would be delighted to visit with them, but that we had already eaten. We entered the dining room and sat together at the dining table. The whole house was filled with beautiful antique furniture. The paintings on the wall were quite tasteful and beautiful as well. The dining room table had a real red lace tablecloth and an unique design. It looked as like it was made up of little lace roses. Everything on the table was silver. Even the plates, cups, bowls, they were all silver. The maid and cook, both dressed in white, served the food as we sat at the table. Both the maid and cook had the same family face as the two sisters, only these servants were shorter and seemed slightly retarded. But the family resemblance was unmistakable. It was explained by the two sisters that their servants were all second cousins from the poorer side of the family. The cook and the maid showed no emotions at all as they served, and they expressed no personality. The main dish was a meat plate. It was served on an oval silver platter. It was all very strange looking. It was made up of small slices of different types of meat that were garnished slightly with what looked like ketchup. It had all been shaped to look like a rose. And if y'all know Britney Spears' Instagram, she puts out a bunch of rose symbolism all over her cryptic messages that she puts out on there. The two sisters explained what was in it. They said that the meats were pork, chicken, turkey, venison, beef, goat, and human flesh. These different meats had all been chopped up together and mixed up with spices, and once shaped into this floral form, they had been garnished with a mixture of ketchup and human blood. And the two sisters explained this. I had no doubt that they were telling the truth, although I had a smile rigidly fixed upon my face. I could not have felt more sickened by the meat plate in front of me than if I had held dog crap. There was a small bowl of vegetables next to the meat plate, but for some reason, the vegetables seemed just as disgusting. The cup of tea and glass of water felt suspect as I glanced at them, so I had no trouble obeying the Baron's mandate that I should eat or drink nothing while in this house. So the Baron told him not to eat or drink anything that's in there. The two sisters explained where they got their human cattle meat. They said that once a year they harvested a family of migrant farm workers. During the summer, the roads of the Midwest were frequented with cars and trucks which held the families of poor and often undocumented farm workers. These were people who, if they went missing, would not be searched by the authorities. Fresh and healthy meat for the taking. So the two sisters would send out their bodyguards. These were the three women who had greeted us at the door and frisked the Baron. The three women would travel about during the proper season and find a family of healthy-looking poor people. They would pretend to be charitable Christian women to help out the poor. They would tote Bibles, wear pretty dresses, and hang Christian crosses around their necks. They would locate some poor family in need. They would provide that family with donuts, cake, or some other food they might crave. This food would have been laced with drugs so that once the family had eaten it, they would fall into unconsciousness. The three women would tie them up and load them into the back of a van. When the migrant farm workers would wake up, they would find themselves chained up in a remote barn. A day or so would pass and they would be given lots of water to drink. When the drugs had passed out of the system, they would be systematically slaughtered. And what do we have right now going on at the border? Why do you think they are letting all these people come right through? I'm telling you, this stuff is dark. It is dark and very, very evil. And it goes very deep. The second cousins of the two sisters would do the butchery, with the two sisters supervising the entire process. They would typically start with the father, cutting him up slowly while he was still alive. They do this in front of the rest of the family, who would scream and beg for mercy. The second cousins would process the mother and younger children in this way until all the meat and blood had been harvested. The internal organs, which they didn't wish to use, were composited, and the bones were ground up for gardening. They would use some of the blood for cooking purposes, and some of the blood went into their vegetable garden. So nothing was wasted. The two sisters explained that they only ate human cattle meat in moderation and in combination with the meats from other types of animals. So a single family, if it were large enough and plump enough, could supply their needs for a year. The manner in which the two sisters ate their meat plate was peculiar. They used their forks for the vegetables and their spoons for the tea, but they picked away at the meat plate with their fingers. As they were eating their meat, they would say things like, it's so delicious and it's so tasty. When they had eaten all of the meat off of the silver platter, they then licked off all the red blood ketchup garnish that remained. They licked it until the platter was clean. Even the Baron, who was usually unaffected by any event that he witnessed, winced at the display. I sat with a smile robotically fixed on my face and my back straight and my purse on my lap. But it took all of my concentration to keep myself from vomiting as they ate this way. After the meal thankfully ended, they took us to see their satanic temple, which they had constructed in their basement. The two sisters took their religion very seriously, so showing us this temple was a big deal for them. And as bizarre as it may sound, in a sense, both the Baron and I felt flattered that they had even offered to show it to us. To them, their belief in Satan was very sincere, and to show us this, their altar was an act of extreme emotional intimacy, or at least we had thought so when they had invited us. I had seen a number of Luciferian altars by then, and sometimes it had been a pleasant experience. Some Luciferians reveal their inner feelings through their altars, and in some cases they are quite beautiful. Bernie entered the dark stairwell. The Baron followed, and I was behind him. Nancy brought up the rear. Although Bernie trotted quickly down the stairs, the Baron proceeded slowly, and I soon discovered why. The entire staircase was painted flat black, as were the walls. There was a tiny overhead light that shined dimly, but the worst problem wasn't the lighting. The worst problem was the stairs themselves. They were not standardized size stairs. The depth of each stair was too shallow, and the width of each stair was overly narrow, and there were no handrails. It was as if the stairs had been designed to make you tumble down them. Furthermore, you couldn't clearly see where you were stepping because of the dim lighting and the blackness. It took concentration to figure out where you should step. And sometimes the width of the stairs changed. So the Baron's slow progress down the stairs was filled with tension. Nancy behind us kept on chiding us to go faster, but the Baron ignored her. With each thoughtful step that I made, I felt more and more afraid. Before us, a third of the way down, there was a curtain of red beads. We cautiously pushed through them. Then a bit further down, we faced a similar curtain of blood red beads. We pushed through them as well. The beads made a slight rattling sound as they closed behind me. A unique smell rose up in the basement. It smelled of overly perfumed incense, and there was a faint rotten smell like that of dead meat that had been left out for far too long. I could feel bile rise in my throat as we proceeded downward. Finally, after we pushed through the third red curtain, we found ourselves in the basement. We were stunned by what we saw, and we couldn't say anything. Nancy came around from behind us. "What do you think?" she asked. "It's beautiful," I replied. That was an understatement. The entire basement had been designed and painted to mimic an ancient Egyptian temple. It was painted in the colors of green, orange, red, yellow, and blue. On the north side, there were 2 statues of the Sphinx. Next to the Sphinx was a white column, and the next to the other was a black column. Fastened to each column was a full-length mirror. Before each mirror was a prayer rug on the platform. Across the length of the basement, there were columns that aligned to those 2, each of which had been beautifully painted in bright colors with varying artistic designs. The floor was covered in black and white tiles like a chessboard, and you see this in a bunch of movies. Black and white checkerboard floors is just Masonic 101. On the east and west walls, there were paintings in the Egyptian style, like those you might find in an ancient temple. The ceiling had been painted a dark blue, and it was decorated with white 5-pointed stars, each the size of my hand. The immediate impression was that of beauty. But the Baron knew better than to trust the 2 sisters. He said nothing. I walked into the temple with the 2 sisters, but the Baron remained by the doorway. When I looked back at the south wall, I began to realize that this basement temple might not be so beautiful. On it was a skeleton of a child crucified upon a child-sized cross. The skeleton had a crown of thorns on its head, made out of rusty barbed wire. Little pieces of rotten meat still clung to those bones. So in that temple, a child was sacrificed. I looked back over at the altar on the north wall. It was between the 2 sphinxes. Here's Sphinx right here. It was made of stone. It was a flat table with blood channels in it at the top. It was wide enough that a child could be laid on it for sacrifice. Behind the table was a red wall with a large golden inverted pentagram painted upon it. On a ledge in the center of the pentagram sat a golden statue of a dragon. It looked more Chinese than Egyptian. Each of the 2 sphinxes had a face on it which was identical to one of the 2 sisters. The sphinx by the black column had Nancy's face, and the sphinx by the white column had Bernie's face. The statues were of high professional quality. The 2 sisters seemed to go into a trance state as they walked toward the altar. Each bowed her head before the Sphinx, which depicted her own face. So they're basically, this is what Satanism is. It's worship of self. What do you think is the reason for all these celebrities? They are all worshipers of self. And if y'all don't know it, you will know it now, that all the celebrities that people go and admire, these are the new pagan gods. That is what they represent. Okay, page 25. As the 2 sisters worshiped themselves as goddesses, I wandered around the basement temple. I had seen images of the ancient Egyptian artwork in books before, and although the images painted on either side of the temple imitated the style of that art, the content was quite different. These paintings held images of child rape, child sacrifice, torture, and cannibalism. Some paintings showed ancient Egyptian warriors killing unarmed people, and piles of human skulls were depicted. Although I said nothing, I suddenly realized that this temple was a horror. It wasn't the beautiful temple I imagined it was when I first wandered in. I've seen quite a few satanic temples and altars, some in person, and quite a few in films and photos, but the satanic temple constructed by the two sisters was unique. It was a reflection of an intense sense of aesthetics as well as perfect insanity. It was horrific and beautiful in equal measure. In some ways, I felt lucky to see it, but mostly I felt sickened by it. The Baron was an enthusiastic Satanist, and he had a dark satanic temple in the basement of his own mansion. But there was something so hideous about this particular temple that even he had felt repulsed by it. He gestured for me to walk back toward him. I slowly began to get away from the two sisters and walk toward the exit door where the Baron waited. But instantly the two sisters jumped up and came over to either side of me. "Don't you want to learn the mystery of the Sphinx?" asked Bernie. I nodded my head, and I felt both terrified and fascinated by them at the same time. "The Sphinx isn't what most people think," said Nancy. "You're such a clever little boy, Kathy. You must know that the history of the world, which you were taught in school, is mostly silly nonsense designed to fool the human cattle," said Bernie. And with that quote, I 100% believe that the shit that they give us in school was bullshit. I nodded. "The Sphinx in Egypt in front of the Great Pyramid is 50,000 years old, much older than the pyramids," said Nancy. So this is a Sphinx. This is a picture of it. So this girl starts getting into the history of the Sphinx, which is really, really interesting what she says. "Originally, it didn't have a human head. It had a lion's head," said Bernie. "They carved the big lion's head into a smaller human head much later on. Do you know why they did that?" I shook my head. "The most ancient of peoples worshiped the lion because in ancient times, the lions hunted humans and ate them. So humans worshiped the lions as gods because the lions were higher on the food chain. Do you understand, Kathy?" I nodded. Then Bernie said, "But people learned to hunt and kill the lions, and so humans became higher on the food chain than them." Nancy completed her thought by saying, "So the ancient royalty realized that if we were to become gods in the eyes of the people, they had to be as the lions once were. So the ancient royal families began to eat their peasants. This is how they came to practice cannibalism. Whoever is higher on the food chain than the peasants rules over the peasants. This is why the practice of cannibalism is necessary to the attainment of aristocracy. And this is a secret of the Sphinx. It has the body of a head who eats people, but it has the head of a pharaoh who looks human. So it's the perfect symbol of aristocratic cannibalism." At this point, the Baron interjected himself. And if you look, that they're pushing cannibalism pretty hard now on everybody. I mean, it is way, way out there. That's an interesting theory, old girls, but we're on a schedule here. This is what the Baron is telling them. "And I think that it's time that we visited your library. You have some photos that need to be autographed, I think," he said in a voice of authority. At that point, Bernie ran to the door, going past the Baron, then scampered up the stairs. The Baron said to me, "Come on, boy, or I'll leave you behind." Nancy started to trot toward the exit door, but I ran past her. I followed the Baron up the stairs. Nancy was stuck behind us. Bernie shouted from the top of the stairs for Nancy to come past us. But the Baron put out his hands onto the walls of either side and then used them to help him steady himself as he walked up the peculiar stairs. I did the same thing and walked up the narrow staircase, feeling my way along the strangely shaped steps. Nancy complained to her sister that she was stuck behind us. At that point, the Baron slowed down and began to walk carefully up the stairs so he wouldn't stumble. I was right behind and below him. At one point, Oh, okay. Once we reached the top of the stairs, there was a brief confrontation between Bernie and the Baron. I know all about your silly games, Bernie, the Baron said. I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, replied Bernie. You were going to lock us up in your basement and beg us to be released. That's what you did to those two chaps from the committee who came to visit you recently. Well, I never. You men, you think you're equal to us. Do you even know what our bloodlines are? The Baron folded his arms over his chest and said, I have the authority of the committee and of the Dark Mother. You've insulted her for the last time. Do you really believe that you can insult her again? I don't give a fuck for your inbred generational fucking bloodlines. The Dark Mother outranks you and you've disobeyed her in every order. And if you don't know the history of the Dark Mother, they are basically, I believe they do stuff right here in this. This is the castle. And they're basically like, I want to say they're like married to Lucifer. And allegedly Anderson Cooper's mother was one of the mothers of darkness also. Gloria Vanderbilt. I'll get into them on one of these videos also. Both Bernie and Nancy looked afraid when he mentioned the Dark Mother. I don't know who or what she was, but whoever she was, the two sisters were afraid of her. Bernie said, We've nothing but respect for the Dark Mother. Now she has bloodlines to be respected. It was only out of respect for her that we allowed you and your little horde to come visit us today. Nancy said, The Dark Mother asked us to perform a simple task to atone for our disobedience, and that's what we intended to do. With that, everyone headed upstairs, but the two sisters were clearly upset. Their faces showed repressed anger, and after we reached the second floor, when we came across their two slave girls, the two sisters took out their anger on them. The two little slave girls were cleaning the upstairs bathroom. They were both nude except for the brass slave collars around their necks. Their heads were clean shaven, but when they saw the two sisters coming, they put on wigs of black hair with bangs in front. They had been cleaning the bathroom floor with toothbrushes, rags, and little cups of soapy water. So they basically did beat up the slave girls. The Baron said, This is all very amusing, but you can torment your slave girls at any time. We have some business to conduct. And as I've said, we're on a schedule. If you don't leave this house by a certain time, my driver has instructions. And in spite of your so-called bodyguards, I don't think you'll like the results. And if the Dark Mother finds out that you aren't cooperating, things won't go well for you. So they go into a secret library. Once inside the library, the mood of the two sisters changed again. They went back to their personas of the gracious host. They explained about all the books in their library. They had perhaps 100 rare books. The Baron seemed interested in all of them. The two sisters showed us a rare book of secret knowledge on Egyptology. It had never been released to the general public. Copies of it existed only in Luciferian secret libraries. It was written by a British Luciferian Egyptologist. The two sisters showed us that there was a chapter in the book on cannibalism in ancient Egypt. They explained that the ancient Egyptians practiced a peculiar form of cannibalism. And I just want to interject real quick and just tell y'all that in a whole bunch of movies, you will see symbolism that goes back to Greek, Roman, or Egyptology. They always got to put something with one of those, whether it's a statue or something that represents those three places. They would eat the brains of the deceased. Specifically, this was done to the corpses of royalty, priests, priestesses, and skilled craftsmen. Pieces of the brain could be pulled out with special hooks. Also, apparently, the brain could be made into a soup of some kind, which poured out the skull. The ancient Egyptians had figured out that the brain was the organ and craft of knowledge. There was a quote in this book which had been translated from ancient Egyptian. It said something to this effect: "The brain is the clay upon which the knowledge of a man's life is written. All craft is there contained. In death, it may be consumed by the living, and so knowledge is preserved." So after the death of a respected person, the priest would remove pieces of the brain so it could be eaten. And that way the knowledge of the deceased would live on. When a pharaoh would die during the process of mummification, his brain would be removed. The other organs would be preserved in special jars. And you can see a lot of this symbology on the Doja Cat weekend video. Right in the beginning, it's a bunch of Egyptian symbology of the jars, of the scales. There's a whole lot. Like, I'll probably get into that too, like decoding movie music videos. The heart was placed back in the body. I forget what the book said was done with the blood, but the brain or part of it would be eaten by the new pharaoh. Thus, the knowledge of the old pharaoh would be passed on. The two sisters explain that this sort of cannibalism was also used by the priest class and skilled craftsmen. The Egyptologists who had discovered this had decided to keep this fact secret from the general public. The aristocrats in Europe had long promoted the idea that ancient Egypt was a utopian society. They secretly saw it as a model for future Luciferian world civilizations. So they didn't want the general population to realize that seemingly noble pharaohs were actually mentally ill cannibals. Now, if you know what they are trying to do right now, all the stuff that they're pushing with transhumanism, all of this stuff, it's basically the new ways are the old ways, and they are trying to push us back into the Egyptian days, like whenever they had all this stuff going on. This is why I am doing these videos. I'm trying to make y'all aware of all this stuff. I want y'all to just see the signs, be aware, like whenever you see it flash on the screen with whatever they're trying to pursue, just know that there is a reason behind it. And the reason behind it is because they're trying to get us into this dystopian transhumanist world that goes back to the Egyptian days. I had no idea if the two sisters were pulling my leg, but they had several books that suggested that they believed this, and they talked about it in a very serious way. The two sisters had many books on cannibalism, Satanism, secret history, sexology, and pedo sex. They showed us some pictures, and in one book which illustrated gay marriages in ancient pagan cultures, they showed us some photos of their own gay marriage. Nancy was dressed up like Isis and Bernie like Horus. Oh my. And if y'all don't know who Isis is, let's see. Here she is right here. This is Isis. She's always represented as a phoenix. She has the two horns on the top of her. If you've watched Lost Boys, the mama of on the movie The Lost Boys, she is wearing a phoenix necklace on that. And then of course Horus is the one where we get all of our one eye symbolism that all these celebrities do. This is it right here. The Eye of Horus. Also, Aleister Crowley. Also, his Age of Horus is in full effect right now. Finally, they showed us their extensive collection of child prawn. I felt sickened by the photos they showed us. I stopped smiling, but the Baron wasn't looking at me because he was so fascinated by the photos. These were high quality photos of children at all ages, from infancy to just before puberty. The photos were divided into files of different kinds. Some photos were black and white and some were in color. There were photos of little boys and girls' clothing in various states of dress and undress. Most of the photos were of girls. The girls were posed in different ways. Often these poses were suggestive. Some of the girls were in chains and some were tied up. I felt an intense pain in my solar plexus. I felt extremely angry with the Baron and the two sisters. I knew I had to repress my anger. I also knew that I would always hate what they did to children. I could feel the absolute wrongness of their attitude. They finally came to one photo of interest to the Baron. It was a photo of me as an infant lying on a satanic altar. On that altar with me, there was a bell, some black candles, a ritual knife, and a silver inverted pentagram. In the photo, I had a look of pain on my face, and my penis was erect. Behind me was a translucent image. It may have been a double exposure image, I don't know, but there was a dark figure with horns that seemed to be reaching for me. The image of that dark figure was hazy. It was a shadow-like figure, what some people would call a shade. Although I found it to be personally disturbing, I had to admit that the photo was quite unique. So he is on this photo, because these sisters deal in photography and trading child prawn pictures. Like they trade baseball cards. They got the Kathy / Kerth, the author, while he was 12 years old, to sign his name on it because they liked some of his pictures or whatever, or videos that he was doing. The two sisters, put the picture in an envelope, and the Baron is going to take it to the Dark Mother. The two sisters did as they were instructed. They put it into a large manila envelope. They both signed their names on the front before sealing the envelope. Then Nancy opened a drawer and took out a small wooden replica of the Sphinx. She handed it to me as a present for my signing the photo. I thanked her and put it in my purse. The author goes on to say, it was obvious to me that the Baron and the two sisters really had no respect for me. They were talking as if I was a celebrity, but in actuality, to them, I was just a whore. Although I forced myself to smile, it killed me to autograph these photos. I just put the letter K on the back of them. The two sisters placed the photos into one of their special files. They had a huge collection of child prawn, hundreds of photos, and they kept them all organized with a librarian's skill. Some of their child prawn photos had sold for thousands of dollars. The two sisters showed the Baron an old black and white photo of a little naked girl who would later grow up to be a senator's wife. It was worth a small fortune. So they get to leave. The Baron looked at his pocket watch and said we had to run. We all quickly walked downstairs to the lobby. We politely said goodbye and with that we escaped the house. Okay, so after we got some distance away from the home of the two sisters, the limo driver turned up a dirt road. We eventually came into a clearing, and there were a number of cars and vans parked there. I recognized some of the men there as employees and servants of the Baron. Some of them had weapons, and it looked like they were preparing for a military assault or something like that. Bob was my primary contact with the Society of Lucifer. He was my main trainer. He had given me the alter name of Kathy. He was the one who used hypnosis and other methods to condition me to have two personalities: Kerth, the mundane Christian, and Kathy, the cross dressing Luciferian. At the time in my life, I still viewed Bob in a positive way. I thought of him as my advisor and protector. He was a short, thin man who sometimes cross-dressed. And when he cross-dressed, he was called Bobby or Roberta. And I am going to tell you another person that was real high up that would cross-dress that was known to cross-dress was Edgar Allan Hoover, the founder, the whatever you want to call him. He ran the whole FBI. He was known as a cross dresser also, which was, very, very, very crazy how all these, people that have these high important jobs, they're kind of crazy. Okay, so Bob took off my makeup and fingernail polish carefully. Before he stored away my girl's clothing, I took from my purse the wooden sphinx that Nancy had given me. I started to put it in my pocket of my pants. Then I thought better of it. I thought about the child skeleton in the basement temple of the two sisters. I thought about what they said about the Sphinx being a symbol of aristocratic cannibalism. So I took the wooden Sphinx and threw it as far as I could into the woods. When the Baron and his men behind, we left the Baron and his men behind so they could complete their mysterious mission. In his sports car, Bob drove me back towards my home in the suburbs outside a Midwestern city. I wore the blacked out sunglasses that served as a type of blindfold for part of the way on the journey back. As we drove back, Bob explained that the two sisters were in trouble with their superior in the Illuminati. She was known as the Dark Mother. The problem with the two sisters wasn't that they were cannibals. The Dark Mother had also practiced cannibalism. The problem was that the two sisters were what the Baron called dilettante Luciferians. In other words, they were slackers. They weren't what the Baron liked to refer to as producers. The idea is that everyone in the Illuminati must produce income for their superiors, or they must do some type of work that the committee considers to be useful. The two sisters had inherited great wealth and were happy to live a satanic lifestyle on their own. They had their home, their small group of loyal employees, and their own satanic temple. They had their human cattle meat, their slave girls, and their indulgences. The two sisters didn't want to work for anyone or to produce anything. They were happy spending most of their time in their home playing with their slave girls, looking at their child prawn collection, and reading their rare books. This unproductive way of life had gone on for years, and so they were to be punished. They had made oaths of obedience when they joined the Illuminati, and they weren't keeping their oaths. So, two men, representatives of the committee, were sent to the home of the two sisters with a letter of authority from the Dark Mother. But in their arrogance, the two sisters had played a trick on them, on the men. They had put LSD into their tea, and when they had all visited the basement temple, the two sisters had locked them in there for hours. The two men had a bad trip and had become dehydrated. They begged the two sisters to let them out. They reminded the two sisters that they had been sent there on a mission from the Dark Mother. Finally, fearing the wrath of the Dark Mother, they let the men go, telling them to never return. But this treatment of her representatives was an insult to the Dark Mother. Realizing that they had gone too far, the two sisters wrote a letter of apology to the Dark Mother. So the Dark Mother had written a letter back to the two sisters telling them that they were to atone to her by doing her a small favor. She wanted them to send her an autographed copy of a valued child prawn picture taken of me when I was a child, but in reality, the Dark Mother was not concerned with something so trivial as child prawn. She had greater plans. This request for the autographed photo gave the Baron the excuse he needed to enter into the home of the two sisters so he could check out their security system. Like a Trojan horse, I had been used to give him an excuse to enter into their home. Bob explained that the Baron was going to send his men into the home of the two sisters that night. They were going to make prisoners of the two sisters and all their inbred servants. The two sisters were going to lose their home, their rare books, and the two slave girls. The Baron loved to rob other people. It was his specialty, but he always shared some of what he robbed with his superiors in the Illuminati. Later on, I would find out more about how the Baron avenged himself upon the two disrespectful sisters. After the Baron took the two sisters and their second cousins prisoners, he took possession of all their rare books. He divided the collection and gave it to the other Luciferian leaders who outranked him, and he gave the two sisters valuable collection of antique furniture and paintings to the Dark Mother. The Baron took the two slave girls and made them a part of his household staff. He took off their slave collars and let them wear clothing. He let them grow out their hair on their heads. He was less cruel to them than the two sisters had been, so they felt that the Baron was their rescuer, but they were still slaves. Years later, they would escape the Baron and become celibate Christians, but that's another story. Finally, the Baron had looted all the valuables from the home of the two sisters. He made them watch as he burnt it to the ground, but before doing that, he had forced the two sisters to watch as he and his men smashed up their statues and the columns in the basement. Then after the fire, the basement had been filled up with rubble and dirt. And so their satanic temple, where the two sisters had worshipped themselves as goddesses, fell to ruin. I can imagine the Baron laughing as he watched the burning of their home, while the two sisters wept bitterly at their loss. The Baron loved revenge. After this humiliation, the two sisters had to go before the Dark Mother. They were transported in handcuffs while they rode to New York City in the back of a van. Once in front of her, they prostrated themselves before her, kissing her feet. They begged for their lives and swore that they would never disobey her again. They swore that they would worship the image of the Dark Mother every day, and they swore that they would stop worshiping their own images. They declared that the Dark Mother was the only goddess that they would ever worship from that day forth. So it was that day that the Dark Mother decided to spare their lives. I found out later that the two sisters wound up living in New York City and working for the United Nations. So the United Nations, the one who is, who really, really runs that. And if y'all don't know what the United Nations is, they are basically the ones that are trying to take over the world government, and this is their logo right here. This is their logo right there. After being punished for their transgressions, they decided to do whatever work was assigned to them by the Dark Mother. So the Dark Mother made them into members of an elite think tank that worked for the United Nations. I've been told that many of the ultra wealthy elites that secretly control the United Nations are practicing cannibals who keep slaves, so the two sisters probably fit right in. The two sisters were well educated and quite intelligent, so from a Luciferian point of view, it was logical that they would wind up on a United Nations think tank. This think tank was a group of intellectuals who made plans for the United Nations takeover of the world. They also made plans for creating a new civilization for the human race once this takeover was complete. So finally, the Dark Mother found some practical use for the intellectual talents of the two sisters. As we drove down the road away from the home of the two sisters and back toward the far city where I lived, Bob took the opportunity to educate me further on the ways of the Society of Lucifer. At that point, I still had to wear the blackened out sunglasses, but that helped me to better visualize what Bob was saying. At one point during our journey, he explained to me that cannibalism among the wealthy Satanists living in the East Coast urban areas is quite common and well organized. He said that there were companies, each of which used some shell companies as a front, which would sell higher quality human meat for high prices. Bob told me that these dealers and cannibalistic products bring in human traffic from around the world. Low income workers from abroad are brought in on cargo ships. They are lured in with stories of income that they can earn at the Golden Mountain, which is a prosperous nation of America. Because these workers are undocumented, the human traffickers can do what they want with them. I learned that wealthy Luciferians control the docks and the city government. Some of these undocumented workers are sold off to slave labor to work in sweatshops. Others are sold to professional food suppliers or cannibals. That's all, what do we have going on right now at the border? Oh my God, these people are under the impression that they are here to make a better life or whatever, and they are the Luciferians elites have another plan for them, is all I'm going to say. Bob went on to explain that some of these slaughterhouses treat the human cattle kindly, but some are cruel. Some human cattle are tortured first so that their meat and blood becomes adrenalized. But there are other slaughterhouses which treat the victims more kindly. In such slaughterhouses, they are killed quickly without pain or fear. This is done by slitting their throats from behind when unexpected during a medical examination. Bob also explained kosher cannibalism. Most cannibalistic Satanists don't come from Jewish families, but some do because secret Baal worship by groups pretending to be Jews goes back for centuries. Baal is the god of the planet Saturn, which is another name for Satan. The religion of Baal goes all the way back to the times of the prophet Elijah, 1,000 years ago. At that time, the early peoples of the Holy Lands, and remember, this is Baal right here, so this right here was basically Satan. The Holy Lands divided themselves into two conflicting factions. One group continued to worship the true God revealed by Moses, I am that I am, but another group was converted to worship of Satan, who back then was called Baal. Over the centuries, the Baal worshippers began to hide their real religion by pretending to be Jews. So although they were fake Jews, they did nonetheless embrace aspects of Jewish culture. These modern-day secretive Baal Jews still take the kosher rules seriously. So they don't drink blood, they don't cannibalize other Jews, but they do eat human goyim, non-Jews, when such a process according to kosher rules. These professional human meat producers prepare the products in various ways so that when it is packaged, it doesn't look different from any other types of meat. Wealthy cannibals look at the photos and select the human meat they want based on their whims or desires. The victims are inspected by doctors before being slaughtered. Thus, quality is ensured. Meat from both adults and children is available, again, depending upon the particular slaughterhouse. Such human cattle meat is very expensive and considered to be a delicacy. According to what I was told by Bob, wealthy satanic politicians, both Republican and Democratic, sometimes secretly put human flesh into the dishes at their expensive fundraising dinners. Those dinner guests who are Luciferians know this, but the non-Luciferians are clueless. On a global level, cannibalism is just one aspect of a larger corporate structure. So it's really more widespread and commonplace than most people have been led to believe. A myth has been sold to modern society that cannibalism can be found in the jungles of Africa or the South Sea Islands, but not among the civilized white people. But this is untrue. If anything, cannibalism is more common among whites than among non-whites, particularly wealthy white people. The only difference is the aboriginal cannibals don't conceal their behaviors, whereas civilized Luciferian cannibals do. Not all people who work in the United Nations think tanks are cannibalistic, incestuous PEDOs like the two sisters, but all persons who work for these UN think tanks are as insane as the two sisters. If you don't believe me, read the United Nations Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which, by the way, is endorsed by Pope Francis. I'm telling y'all, Catholics, this Pope, y'all need to do research on him because he is no bueno, no good at all. If the UN agendas were to succeed, they would take away all the power from national and local governments so that the plutocrats who run the United Nations would have complete control of all sources around the world. All food, water, animals, and land would be controlled by the globalist elites. All people would be forced into human settlement zones. Everyone would be watched and controlled. The UN's Luciferian leaders intend that this plan will be achieved completely by the year 2050 AD, and so far they are still on schedule for doing that. The only thing that I have to say about that right now is that a lot of people are waking up, and their big old thing that they tried in 2019, I think it got kind of thrown off the rail of those agenda timelines. I'm not saying that they have stopped. They are still trying. They're going. That's why we're seeing more craziness out there in the world. But their final thing to have all this wrapped up, to have their satanic aeon on the world here, they want it all done by 2050. So, and later on my Instagram, I'll put some pictures up of Agenda 2030, Agenda 2040, Agenda 2050. Most people don't understand that the entire United Nations building is actually a satanic temple. It's a small room in the United Nations. In a small room in the UN, there is a satanic altar. This is called the meditation room. It has an ugly abstract printing on one wall. And if you look carefully at that painting, you can see a symbolic representation of a scythe. The scythe symbol can be symbolic representation. I mean, it's generally known to represent death, human sacrifice, and the planet Saturn. So remember that picture that I showed y'all with Kronos? It's basically that, like the Grand Reaper symbol. That is what it is. At the center of this so-called meditation room is an altar made of black stone, and later on I will also get into the black stone, the black cubes. There's a bunch of movies that all represent this black stone. There are 10 seats which face the altar, each which represents one of the 10 satanic kings who are to co-rule the world once it has been unified by the UN. So they are really planning on bringing demons and having them sit in that boardroom. Bob once explained to me that when the building is empty late at night, the elite Satanists who run the UN use it secretly for child sacrifice. The author goes on to say that he's glad he got out of the two sisters alive, that they were probably thinking about killing him and eating him the whole time that he was there, and they probably were. They seem crazy enough. So he goes on to say that